Welcome to the Death and All the Rest podcast, where we talk about life, death, and everything in between. Today, I'm thinking about, Chris, the subject of aging and atrophy, and I think that encompasses a lot. A lot. There's like different levels of aging where we see atrophy play in. There's different realms of atrophy. We're talking about there's physical decline, there's the mental shift that comes with the different levels of aging. There's also identity uh, recalculation that kind of happens, like all of these elements. So I say this because it's a broad topic. I think that there's tons and we'll probably go all over the place. What about it?
Yes. All right. I think about this topic, and what I think about it is I think it happens and we do change, and I don't think we're aware of it. And because we're not properly aware of it or taking note of it, I think it can lead us into bad places in our life, and we're not recalibrating ourselves and taking this into account. And because of that, we're losing a little bit of our sense of control. And I think how this works with existential dread is that it produces like a sense of loss of self, or a sense of loss of identity, or loss of strength. And that produces more death anxiety.
Hmm.
There you go.
You know what I think might be helpful too, as we're talking about it. Atrophy is one of those terms that I think we take for granted. That we understand exactly what we mean by aging and atrophy, and I think for listeners, it would be really helpful if we just made sure to expand on what we mean and in the context of this conversation, kind of how we're talking about atrophy.
I agree. Okay.
Go for it.
What I think of is physical physical atrophy, in the sense that your body withers. It becomes less firm, less strong, less robust, and less functional. Like you could see something dying on a vine, a plant in the sun withering under the heat or due to not being watered. That kind is what happens to our body. Our bones become more brittle. Our processing speed in our brain slows down. Perhaps like the one that everybody can relate to, maybe the easiest, is your eyesight deteriorating and your hearing deteriorating. I have experienced both of those now, and they happen, and I have changed how I react to the world, the calculations I make, but I don't take enough notice of that. And I think that it's important to understand that and see that happening to yourself. It's like when I'm driving, I have to be like when I was 18, I was doing 80 miles, 90 miles down the freeway all the time. I'm excited. I'm full of testosterone. I'm hard charging, and my reaction times are super quick. I'm processing. I'm seeing real good. I'm hearing real good. I can handle it, or so I thought. I was also foolish and young and inexperienced, and that's another element of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I'm older, I literally have to be more conservative and careful because I don't see as well as I used to. And my reaction time is probably not as good as it used to be. So I drive slower. I'm more defensive in my driving. I have a bigger gap between other people. And I'm cranky at the 18-year-old kid who's fucking tailgating me and then blowing around me on a snowy, icy road. I'm like, that idiot is going to get us killed. And maybe he's fine. I got this. No problem, Grandpa. So I guess I've been two sides of that. And it helps me to notice that, to know that. And I think that you can jump off from that model I just gave and think about that from a lens of like, what does that mean about my identity? And what does that mean about me, like my sense of self and my sense of fear of the dangers of this world?
Mhm.
What do you
Yeah, it's funny because like I recognize now at my prime 34 years of age that like I can't drive at night, even with my glasses. I can't see. I can't see to have like I can't see the road in front of me unless it's like a perfect straight shot and it's lit up well. But like I can't see what's coming. I can't see if there are animals crossing over. I can't see if there are people. I can't see if there's an obstruction. I can't see anything. And actually, my doctor had told me, my eye doctor, um, over a decade ago that I should not drive at night. And I was
think?
like, I'm fine to drive at night. I'm not fine to drive at night. But there's like with that, there's this like you said, this conservative approach because I'm not invincible. And I know that now.
Yeah.
10 years ago, I might have known that, but like not to the same extent. Uh, so I feel you on that. And I think too, like an element for me in this conversation about atrophy is the literal definition of atrophy of like that, deterioration or breakdown of body, of muscle. I also think about it in a metaphorical sense, in a sense of there are lots of different ways that things atrophy for us throughout our lifetimes, and that can be different skills, different things that we've been able to do, and not just physical. Kind of thinking of it as like, I guess like I'm drawing this parallel in my head as I'm talking about it, and let's see if it goes somewhere and actually makes sense as I'm processing it. I think about the concept of pruning, where
Yeah.
your brain does, right? Where it's like, oh, we don't use this thing anymore and we haven't used it in a long time and we only have a certain amount of bandwidth to actually hold all of this information that you carry. So we're just going to prune this piece off because we don't need it. But that is a sense of atrophy, right? Like we've effectively lost. There's a breakdown in our ability to do this thing that we were once able to do or have this knowledge that we once had. And I think that that's a big thing that happens because there's the obvious physical decline that happens over our lifetime. And to a point, there's like a building physical incline, right? For like to a certain point, we get to where there's this like prime, we're in our physical prime. And for me, that's looked a lot different than I think for a lot of people because of chronic pain and chronic illness stuff, which is its own topic. But then there's this kind of plateau period, and then there's the decline because inevitably we get older. But I also think there's atrophy, metaphorical atrophy that happens to us all throughout all of the years, and it's not necessarily just like it starts at a certain age and it stops at a certain age, or we're gaining, where it's like all the skills or the ability that we have and then it plateaus and tapers off. It's like it ebbs and flows very much.
Mhm.
It's more of a wave than it is a bell curve.
Yeah. And all these little losses are little deaths. They're like little doors closing,
Yeah.
loss of like little opportunities or big possibilities that you could have had that you like recognize often in the rearview mirror that is no longer an option, a possibility for you. You know, I am not going to play pro baseball.
Right. Yeah.
There was a time where if I had been in the right mindset and all that, and better athlete, I could have played pro baseball. uh, never wanted to. I'm just kidding. But like recognizing that stuff
Mhm.
is key. And I also think that not recognizing these things, these this atrophy, um, both physically and mentally, can get you in trouble
Mhm.
in your life. Uh, in the sense that like uh, you may consider yourself capable of things that you are no longer capable of, and
Mhm.
put yourself in danger, physical danger,
Sure.
um, or like what you might think was true about, maybe I'm getting too general here, maybe what you once thought was true about life was really a reflection of the stage of life that you were in and the health of your body and your mind and all this possibility. But once you've gone a little bit farther down the curve and tasted a little bit more loss and had a little bit more of this atrophy, it's no longer 100% true. So, in a sense, maybe what I'm trying to say is uh, this growing into strength and then the plateauing and then falling off the other end. And however that occurs for you affects your sense of reality
Mm-hmm.
in the world. And I want to say one thing and I'll kick it to you is I have had this now that I'm 49 years old. I have had these experiences over the last 10 years now where I'm like, am I obsolete?
Mm.
Have I passed the cultural curve? Am I no longer like, can I no longer fully be in touch with the zeitgeist? I don't know what skibbity toilet means. And I don't want to know. And I look at music today and there's it, dare I say it, some of it sounds like noise to me. Uh and I think about that and there is an element of frustration
Mm-hmm.
and that becomes judgment and that becomes divorcing me from connection
Yeah.
to the younger human beings. And if I was to extrapolate that to society, is that why we're so screwed? Not just like a lot of boomers and a lot of Gen Xers, which is my cohort,
Yeah.
like not getting that this is, we're at a nadir apex. It's the same opposite word. We're at an inflection point where this is a make or break thing. And the people that are at their growing into their strength have a huge strike against them that is not of their making, and they have to save the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's funny even hearing you say that, like, I don't know what skibbity toilet means and I don't want to. And like, trust me, on one hand, I get it. Especially like of all things, skibbity toilet. That's one that really gets me. But like even, Riz and the other things, the lingo, the slang that's coming up with this generation, we had our own. Um, I feel differently about it though. For me, I do want to know. I do want to understand what those things are because, and I guess it goes to your point, your greater point about it being about connection because um, I remember there being so much separation, generational separation between my parents' generation, boomers, and mine. I'm a millennial. And this idea that we're so far apart. And I think we perpetuate that idea. We make ourselves farther apart from each other than we need to be. And I have nieces who are 14 right now, turning 15 soon. And then I have really young nieces and nephews who are, 5, 6 years old and I want to be able to relate to them, and I'm the kind of person too, even in my relationship with my husband, like I'm so much more in tune with like the pop culture references and the things, the viral things that generate on social media that people are talking about. And I think it does help me to be more connected to people because in general, and not just different generations, like in my own generation too, but these things that are happening when people are referencing them, that's a point of connection and communication that people use a lot. And they reference something, and if you don't know what they're talking about, if you're not in on the latest trend, the latest viral theme, you're just left like, what does that mean, instead of being able to be like in on this conversation, on this joke, and enjoying it too. And then what's the opposite of connection? We feel isolated. And I
Yeah.
think like we do that to ourselves in some ways because we feel like this actually leads to a point that I was thinking too, like the risk of atrophy is not just potentially not realizing that something has atrophied and that we think that we're capable of something we're not. But something I think that happens a lot on the other end of that spectrum is that people will feel like they've hit a certain point of atrophy and then they start to act as if everything has gone away, that they kind of just lost the thread for all of their ability to function or relate or understand. And then there's just this hopelessness, this veil that drops where it's like kind of like there's no going back from here. I'm talking about mental and physical atrophy, but
Yeah.
like, oh, there's no going back. So I might as well just resign myself to the fact that it's kind of over. And I'm not talking about life. Like these people will keep living, but their living is almost a ghost of themselves because, well, I'll never be able to do that again. I'll never be able to think like that again. I'll never be able to engage in this thing that I once loved engaging in again. So what's the point? And then we let everything go to the wayside. And there's like more than just a little death in that.
Yeah. That's isolating. And then you check out.
Yeah.
And we actually know from science that like that isolation, loneliness, and then not participating, checking out increases atrophy, increases decay,
Mm-hmm.
and poor performance of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
You actually have to fight this. You have to like stand up against the tide, which is one of my favorite sayings. And I do see this in myself. Like I said, I do have these feelings, and
Sure.
I also like. I think I reject some of like what I consider trendiness
Mm-hmm.
and the hyper trendiness of life. Um, and, that, and maybe that is um, a facet of myself that's come to the front as I have aged.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I do crave the connection. And now I want it in a different way. Like yeah, like you talked about, like social media and the language and the television shows and the music. Um, I don't watch TV. I haven't watched TV in 12, 15 years. Like we have a big flat screen TV and we turn it on 5 times a year. Um, and I listen to older music that like even then my generation I did. 90s, still
Mm-hmm.
got the heavy metal and punk and the grunge, but now I'm listening to like jazz and like old rock and proto punk and things like that. But what I do crave, and I think that is still um, keeping me young, I hope, and keeping me involved, is to like the one-on-one, earnest connection. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the way I look at it, I guess, is like I don't want to small talk anymore. I don't want to talk about your favorite band. I want to talk about like what's serious to you and to me and where we relate on that. And I think I can do that. And I do want to talk about that with younger people than me because like
Mm-hmm.
that's the only way I'm really going to hear or really get to know what they're going through.
Sure.
I think is because I'm not going to listen to their rock music and decode that shit. I want to. I'm going to ask them. I hope. I need to do more of that.
Do you think there's any lost connection in that? Because people, for a lot of people, their music is symbolic, right? There's a reason that they resonate with their music. And like, I get with my nieces, I'm not big into Chapel Roan or Sabrina Carpenter, but they are. And there's something to that. It's why it means something to them. Like, do you think that there's a potential point for loss of connection in missing those points?
Sure, because you lose that shared experience that projects you into the same emotional wavelength.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
I remember, I remember having those moments where you're rocking out at a concert and Pearl Jam is just nailing it. And you look over at your friends, you believe this shit? And you don't even need to talk at all because they're feeling the exact same thing and you feel so goddamn close to them.
Yeah.
Maybe don't get up that all the time, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that there are universals, and I think that one thing I've noticed over the course of my taste, over the course of my life, is that I was much more rigid in my taste. When I
Mm-hmm.
was younger, I was like, it's heavy metal or punk or it's shit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't want to hear no classic, lame. I don't want to hear no pop. I don't want to hear hip hop or rap or, a lot of different things. And as I've gotten older, I've noticed that like real skill and talent and sincerity, people who speak from the heart, sing from the heart, like it crosses genres, it crosses boundaries, it
Mm-hmm.
crosses group identity, and it resonates. It gets you. You don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, oh yeah, this is good shit. So I think those experiences are still available. It's like I don't know, did we say this that time? But something I noticed a lot is like each new, at least in America, uh, group or generation has their Beatles moment when they're growing up.
Mm.
And it's like 15, 16, 17, where they all discover the Beatles. Like, these guys are great, and
Mm-hmm.
like they hear Blackbird or something like that. And like they love it. And so, yeah, I think that still occurs. Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. I have a question for you.
Shoot.
And just as you're talking about this, because it sounds like for you that there is more separation, like generational separation, and that, I think there's totally going to be individual difference in that too. Like, I don't want to say that you speak for all Gen X people, because obviously, like, that's neither of us speak for our generations, but like, what do you think, what's the utility in that for you? Like, what do you get out of having some of that separation from like your generation and the things and the things that you enjoy from the trendier stuff that's now, that the Gen Z kids and the Gen Alpha kids are into?
I wouldn't have contextualized it that way. I didn't know that like I was getting something out of that. No, but that's a very good point. Like, what am I getting out of identifying myself this way? Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Uh, Maybe I'm holding on to my identity. I'm
Yeah.
making markers and I'm identifying it. But maybe the danger of that is I'm just tracing a freaking outline, and I'm boxing myself in, and am I
Mm.
cutting myself off? Am I limiting my scope? Am I putting myself in a position to have rigid black and white judgmental thinking? I don't know. I think about that. I do think about that. I didn't contextualize it as like, am I approaching this from a place of weakness? I thought I was approaching this from a place of like strength and want a connection, but maybe so. Maybe there's more to be found by letting go of that sense of identity. Um, but I don't know, because I worry
Mm.
about that too. I
Yeah.
worry about um, I worry about moments lost in time,
Mm-hmm.
powerful memories and connections and friendships that are gone and that I don't know they're gone because uh, there's nothing to hold on to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And that they like I don't think that there's like a right or wrong to it, right? Like, that's why I was asking, just curious where this comes in for you and what it gives you, because it gives you something, right? Like, and it's like this, you're speaking to this really interesting topic of like the paradox between identity loss and identity gained, right? And for different people, in general, I think we know identity can be quite fluid.
Mm-hmm.
It continues to develop across our lifetime. It's not something, there's a lot of different points in our life where we're reevaluating identity and trying to figure out where it shifts into, but there's no point where we have like reached identity. generally speaking.
Yeah.
But there is this point of like, and everybody, this is where I think it's different person to person, because I think for some people, their identity, um, I'm not sure how to put this. So let's see how the words come out, because their identity is this thing that's so sacred to them and can't be compromised, right? So flexing on that feels like a loss. And then there's other people who their identity can be solid but still be recognized as flexible, fluid, plastic, right? Where it can allow, it can let new things in, it can take things out. And I don't necessarily think one is better or worse. I think these are overarching mentalities that we hold for ourselves and probably relate back to existentialism, right? The meaning and the purpose behind all of this and how our identity relates to that. Um, yeah, but I mean, that's just what comes up for me in hearing you talk about that, because I don't think there's anything wrong with what you're saying and wanting to preserve this identity that you've worked so hard to formulate. And you've had such an experience of shaping your identity and really crafting it into this version of you that's very important to you. And that in and of itself, that doesn't feel wrong to me. But I think there's also, go ahead. I want to hear what you were going to say. Actually, go.
So there's another component.
Mm-hmm.
What about what society and the world enforces on you as an identity framework
Sure. Yeah.
that you may have to like fight back on?
Can you say more about that? Like what, an example?
Racism.
Mm. Yeah.
What I'm really talking about is like when everybody else is telling you you're one way or judging you one
Hmm.
way or limiting your possibility, your opportunity in life
Mm-hmm.
because of a framework that they are trying to impose on you,
Hmm.
um, and to control you and keep you down and fucking kill you sometimes. Uh, I don't know. That's not something that I have seen too much of. But it does make me think a lot about like I have had the experience of being online and somebody's like, oh, that's you're white guying or you're mansplaining. And I felt, very offended by that. No, I'm just expressing my opinion, Christopher Lee Wilson's opinion. And and don't you try to box me in like that.
Mm.
And like I could step out of that for a second and say, like, you're privileged to be able to say that, friend, to myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I need to do that from time to time. But for other people, um, and that can, but for people that can, the effect of that is an orders of magnitude and nuance that I don't understand. That I don't, I would be, I think, um, it would be unfair for me to say I understand that because I don't have that experience. But I've heard people talk about it. Other people talk about it quite clearly about how like that internalized oppression and having an internal battle in your identity, like feeling that affecting you and pushing back on that at the same time. Because no, motherfucker, you're not going to determine how I feel about myself.
Mm-hmm.
And people have to they have to consciously do that. That's a level of like trauma programming and and PTSD and social oppression
Mm-hmm.
that when we're talking about like identity and growth and atrophy that like that is an intersection that has to be so potent that I can't really speak to that accurately.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. It goes back to like how fluid and flexible we are or not for that. Because I think if I'm picking out your point well enough, which I don't know that I was tracking perfectly, to be honest, but there are these identity markers and these intersections of markers where, there are societal beliefs attached to that we can choose to accept, reject, or do otherwise with. And for me, I think I've got my identity has some definitely like crossing identities where I have a lot of privilege in some realms, and then I'm definitely a more marginalized identity in other realms. And there's there's a lot of trying to wrap your head around both, right? Because like with the marginalized parts of me, there's the part of me that doesn't want to be seen as weak, as oppressed, as someone who has been made small in some capacity, whether by my doing or by someone else's or by society in general. Um, but then on the other side of that, on the privileged side of me, there's this part that becomes immediately defensive for myself. Has in the past. This is what I'm talking about. How it lends to the fluidity and the flexibility is to lend to that and to lean into that discomfort that comes up around your identity is bad, even though nobody's outright saying an identity is bad necessarily. Maybe not. Some people may certainly be, but like in the instance I'm talking about, like no one's outright calling me bad for having a certain identity, but it feels bad because there are all these associations made with the identity that I hold. And with that comes this feeling of needing to defend myself, needing to reject that, to feel aligned with who I've always thought myself to be. For me, what I've also found with that, and this is maybe sounding very vague, and I hope it's not, but for me, leaning into that discomfort, letting go of that defensiveness and hearing what's coming up under it. Why is this making me defensive? Why do I feel like I have to defend this part of me? This, like in the instance I'm talking about, this identity, the white part of me, right? This
Mm-hmm.
identity that is a white person. And like, what's under that? What's the point that people are trying to convey to me? They're not saying you're white, you're bad. They're saying other stuff, and I'm hearing it wrong. And like having to like roll around in that and absorb what the point actually is and pulling that defensive shield down. I don't have to protect myself from something. I'm fine. I can hear it. I can tolerate it. And um, I think that there's a level of tying it back to atrophy. Like I could cut that off. I could refuse that level of introspection and growth and say, no, I'm going to defend myself. But it doesn't do me any favors, and it doesn't do the rest of my community or my society any favors by pretending that the elephant in the room isn't staring at me in the face.
Yeah, this is this is a conversation now in some sense about class and status
Mhm.
and class and status identity and insecurity. Um, and it's interesting to be like to feel trapped by that.
Yeah.
You know, that we all feel trapped by that. In many different ways.
Yeah.
And is this, in a sense, like part of the problem right now, the overarching huge problem, in that we feel this identification or identity loss, atrophy on a species wide level,
Mm.
in the sense that um, our markers are decaying and shattering and maybe drowning us in a sense. As institutions seem to be unreliable and failing. You know,
Mm.
you could count on certain things even if you didn't like them. Um, and now there's culture has seemed to like it is homogenous, but it's like this micro fracturing layer over everything too. This is hard to explain. Um, but I have the sense that like um, we feel pigeonholed and we feel alone and we're looking for a group identity too. You know,
Mm.
I need somebody to get my back. I need a strong group to be a part of so we can look after each other as everything seems to be collapsing. Is that part of this? Is that what I'm talking about? I don't know. And while that's happening, and at the same time, it seems to be to my logical brain is like this is where we need to fucking come together more than ever, and and form giant coalitions and quit identifying as all these micro subgroups and just like let's just pull together and go big and fix a bunch of shit and be crazy about it and re-inject some sense of faith in humanity. Getting really big into it. Does any of that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think I see it differently than you do because I think for me, holding on to those micro senses of identity that you're talking about, I think that's what's going to make the collective better and being able to recognize that like we all do have different identities. And yeah, I'm talking about like in um the obvious markers of identity, race and gender and socioeconomic status and those things, but also like the way we see ourselves and how we identify and who we are in the world. And I think for us to let go of that feels like we're letting go of really what could be really useful um, perspectives and um, characteristics that lend that if we let go, if we say that this part of our identity shouldn't matter, we're losing something really valuable. This thing doesn't matter. Let's drop it to be a better collective feels counterintuitive to me because I feel like those identity markers, big, small, and in between, are what can allow us to really be able to like come together more because it's like what we do here. Like even right here in this conversation, we see this stuff differently. And like
Mm-hmm.
being able to have a conversation about it, not that one of us is gonna move from what we're talking about or what we think or how we see things, and that's not the point. But the point is we've had a conversation that otherwise, if we had dropped and just decided to collectively, you know, decide that our identity is we're working together, we're a team, and this is like like a blob of a human now, we're just joined, then we lose all of that nuance of individualism.
I get that, and I agree with that. I'm not trying to like become the Borg
Yeah,
or anything like that. Um, no, and I respect that, and like, yeah, that's I'm circling back to like the loss of identity here.
yeah,
I do think that there is a danger of retreating into smaller spheres, and not having not working together, and
sure,
then
sure,
inter-party warfare. You know, like we could be fighting Canada. This orange dude gets what he wants, you know, or Mexico, and all
yeah,
this shit that we talk about each other. You know, Americans talking about Mexicans, Mexicans talking to Americans, Canadians, vice versa. We've been allies for a long fucking time, despite our
mm,
history.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of cross uh, pollination and shared culture
Mm-hmm.
there. And there's a lot of ugliness, obviously. I'm not saying that, but like things could break more, and that would be bad.
Totally. I think this goes into a conversation that's a little bit different but totally connected, because it's the polarization that we're seeing right now. And you and I have talked about this off screen, but where there's this polarization in this country, there's these really, really extreme sides, and then there's all these people in the middle who are their own piece of the societal puzzle. But like, people's identities are becoming really wrapped up in which side of the political spectrum that they fall, and they're losing the nuance to that, because like, they're doing something really, really interesting with their identity in the way they're tying it to the country. And I think that that feels like human nature, because it feels, in a strange sense, that feels like a survival instinct, right? Because I've got to go, there's these two parties and I've got to pick one, and then now somehow I've got to make this resonate with who I am, and I've got to figure out how to like fit into this box. And that's a different and same topic at the same time, because we're like talking about the individual identities being set aside sometimes, in that where we're blindly saying, okay, well, I've decided I'm this party, so that means I have to encompass these values, these ideals, these beliefs. And what does that do? Now there's cognitive dissonance, there's disorientation playing out in our own brains with how that actually plays into all of our beliefs, our own that we had. But again, survival instinct says, okay, well, it's this or that, or that's how it's being posed to us right now, whether reality or not. That's not reality, but that's how it's being posed to us. And people are feeling like they have to choose, and it's impacting identity, I think, in a big way.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that was what I was trying to get to.
Yeah,
I think there is identity jumping, the
sure.
shifting occurring, and the sense of like, um, I got to pick a side. And
Mm-hmm.
then I have to defend that side. And then you adopt a lot of positions that you might not have believed, or they might
Right.
violate values. And you're like, it's like we're overriding ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that it's fascinating, and we've seen a lot of that in obviously we're talking a little bit about politics, but like different groups joining uh, different political parties that you would traditionally hadn't, and people are
Sure.
like, wow, what's that about? And then everybody's trying to do all these calculations and analysis to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
But to flip that on its head, maybe in this moment there's also a lot of opportunity for creating new healthier identities and groups
Yeah.
that are bigger banner, more inclusive, and maybe reconfigure identity markers and group markers in new ways that may be more applicable to equality and survival and justice for all, and may help us be a more adaptable and flexible and capable society for the moment and existential dangers that we're facing.
Totally. And I think connecting this back to the start of atrophy, this connects perfectly, because it's this pivotal moment where we get to decide, does our identity atrophy to fit into the boxes that we think we're given, or like, do we get to hold on to that? And this is a call to ourselves and to each other about like, where do you want to go from here? It's a choice point. Like, we get to decide. We can default to what we think the options are, or we can stop and take pause and take stock for ourselves of like, but who do I want to be in all of this still? Like all of this, all of the ways that I've seen myself and I've known myself to be, like, who do I want that to be? And I think that's an important thing. You know, we talk a lot in this podcast, it's conversations and relating to existentialism, but also in helping people, like to give people strategies, skills, ways to navigate these things. And the thing, my big takeaway from this episode for listeners would be like, stop and think about you. Think about who you are and who you want to be, and how is that aligning for you right now? How does that align for you in the future? Where do you go with this? And there's not a right or wrong to that. And I'm not just talking politically. Politically is lending to this right now, but in general, like there's this really easy way to like adapt to what we think we have to be, how we have to be functioning, how we have to be seen. And there's this being authentic and true to ourselves and stopping and trying to figure out what that is with lots of introspection. And that's not something, I'm not saying you sit down and within an hour you've got it figured out. This is something that you think about for, like, honestly, years on end, right? Like, and that's where allowing for that fluidity to be and allowing for evolution in that, but really trying to take stock for yourself about tying it back to existentialism. Like, who do you want to be at the end of the day? What's your goal and how are you building towards that?
Yeah. This is a call to action.
A call to action
Yeah.
for all of us.
For all of us. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean like warfare. This is a call
Right.
uh, to step up and be an active agent
Yeah.
in your life and your identity making,
Mm-hmm.
and not like wither and die or fall back on um, our more basic uh, grievance oriented um, cultural markers.
Yeah. This is our opportunity to be who we want to be or be who other people want us to be.
Yeah, opportunity. That's what I'm talking about. Opportunity, call to action. I think that there's apathy out there,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel that. And apathy is inertia,
Mm-hmm.
and that ain't gonna cut it.
Yep.
Not right now.
And I get it. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I get it.
I get it, and I do it. I feel
Yeah.
it.
Yes, totally. Me too. And that's where, like, it's okay. And that's what I want other people to hear too. Like, the stuff that we talk about is some of the stuff that people aren't saying out loud because they don't know where other people are falling on it. And I want people to hear that you can be feeling this apathy and at the same time be fighting for who you are and who you want to be, and figuring that out. And you can have moments where that feels impossible, that feels useless, that feels hopeless, that feels hard, whatever it is. But like, you can have these things happening and still be figuring out ways to keep propelling yourself forward. You just got to be willing to think about that, you know, and that's a normal part of the human experience. We're all feeling all the different things.
Yeah. Feel your feelings,
Mm-hmm.
but don't let them lock you in. Yeah. Okay. I think that's good.
Yeah, I think that sums it up.
All right. Well, if we can close it here then.
Yes.
All right. Well, I would just like to say, to everybody out there, thank you for joining us in this episode of the podcast of Death and All the Rest. Please, sign up or whatever and show up next time where we'll talk about more existential dread and fears and identity. And we'll continue to have this kind of larger overarching conversation. Thank you for being
Cool.
here. Sweet.